If you've never done this before, who's going to send you $50,000? Well, my mind is racing here when I think of the opportunities your platform is going to provide. Because when you think about $2.7 trillion being raised, how many jobs does that create? People are selling their own units, but they're just using your platform and your procedure. You're opening up the fact that somewhere along the line, before the investor comes to us, they get a valuation. I have heard people on panel discussions say never invest with someone who's doing their first deal. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I had to do my first deal. What's the marketplace going to look like in 3 years? Because you guys have come up with a plan that's a little different than it has been in the last 10 years. A lot of people are afraid of tying up their money. And we haven't talked about the real estate at all, which I said I wasn't going to. A lot of good 10-year funds out there. But if I knew there was an active liquidity gain, where do people find out about this? If something comes up in my life and I need liquidity, where am I going to get that liquidity?
Today's guest, this will be his second appearance on the Syndication Show, Mr. Gene Trowbridge. Welcome.
Thank you, Julie.
Gene is an attorney. He's a CCIM. He's an author, and he is also a past sponsor with 45 years of real estate experience. So we're always very, very lucky to have you here in studio. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, this is the first time I've been in the studio. It's lovely.
That's
Congratulations to you guys. That's great. It's good to be here.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here live, Gene. You really are.
Oh, as opposed to what?
As opposed
Dead?
to online. It's good to have you here in person.
Yes.
And I really look at you as a legend in the industry. Many people know you because of how much you've helped syndicators over the years. And on our last show, we had you talk about what is a syndication and when should you syndicate, really talking to those who are starting and running syndications. I'd love to start off talking to the passive investors. When a passive investor is looking to get into an investment, and there's so many opportunities out there, so many different syndications, what should they look for?
All right, that's very important. And I think I'm going to concentrate on what they should look for in a sponsor. Looking for the real estate probably gets us into too much detail of things like NOI and whatever, but let's just concentrate on the sponsor. And I think there are four things that you should look for. And as I go through these four things, we're concentrating on what the passives should look for. But those of you who are listening who are syndicators and are thinking of raising money from passives, you better have these answers. You better be able to address the concerns. And the first concern, and I think the most important concern, is, Julie, I love your offering. I've got the $50,000 that it would take, and I'm happy to invest. I looked at the property and everything's fine. But Julie, tell me, if I give you my $50,000 and something happens to you, what happens to my money?
So that needs to be all spelled out.
And if
right?
that isn't a conversation stopper, which it should be.
Yeah.
And in fact, in my firm, we won't write offerings where Julie is the managing member, period. We need continuity. So Julie needs to say to me, I have a team. And there's more than one person who can sign documents. When we formed our manager LLC, we have at least two people. And if something happens to me, Christian can go ahead and sign the documents, because the bank is always going to want someone to sign. There are all sorts of things that go on in the business world that need to have a signature, and we need to do that. Without that signature and without that continuity, I've had people say to me, well, Gene, the investors will pick someone. Well, the investors don't want to pick anyone. They don't know anything about it. And I don't want my money in the hands of an investor. I want my money in the hands of Julie and Kristen. That's what I'd want to do. So I would stop right away if I was investigating a sponsor and they said, if Julie said, well, I'm just in charge. There is something in the legal world called a springing member. And the same issue, a lender's going to ask, Julie, what happens if something happens to you? We've got this mortgage, we've got all these impounds, construction draws, and all that. And if Julie says, well, I'm just alone here, they're going to require a springing member. And so they would require a corporation to come in as, quote, the springing member. And in a corporation that goes on forever and ever, there are officers, and they'll name 2 officers. And then the document will say if at any time Julie is not able to perform her role, this springing member will step up and perform the role. But who the hell is that? And if I'm an investor, I don't want it left to some corporate geek in Florida to run the operation. So I need continuity in the managing member LLC. The next thing I think as a passive you should ask is, hey, Christian, have you done this before? Not that you should never invest with someone who's doing their first deal, because Christian may have a world of, and I know him, he does have a world of real estate experience. But what we're talking about here is getting investors together and managing the investors inside the real estate. And I will tell you, after having been a syndicator for a very long time, it's much more a people management business than it is a real estate management business. Because if you guys were to take 20 investors in a fund that maybe had a useful life of 7 to 10 years, someone's life is going to change. Some investor's going to have something to go on with their life, and they're going to come to you because they think you have their money.
Mm-hmm.
And the money's in the real estate, so you don't have the money. So that's all something. So the investor would like to know if you've had some experience. And so in my 10-step program of getting a rookie syndicator going, one of the things I say is get your first deal done. You've got to get deal number 1 done. So when they say, have you done this before? You can raise your hand and say, sure, I have, once.
And
That's all you need. That's all you need.
And Gene, to ask a question on that, do you suggest sometimes that they will, or oftentimes, go co-sponsor with somebody who has more experience, so the first one is easier, and that way they can move on to their own?
That might solve both of the first 2 questions, right? What's your continuity? And have you done it before? Well, the team has. The managing member LLC has experience in doing that and has the continuity. So they both kind of work together. But I have heard people on panel discussions say never invest with someone who's doing their first deal. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I had to do my first deal.
Yeah.
And I had to answer that question. I had a world of real estate experience behind me that convinced the people who will invest with me the first time that I'm okay. What's surprising is there are a lot of people that are listening who know people in the real estate business and know that they're successful. And if that person came to them and said, I'm going to put together this group, would you like to invest? Some people might say, yeah, he's a successful guy, Julie's successful. Boy, they have an opportunity. Maybe it's exciting if they allow me to participate in that opportunity. So your first deal will be filled up with investors who know you. And just as an aside, a little later, we're going to talk about a type of deal for the syndicators where you can advertise. And try to get people who don't know you. Okay? If you've never done this before, who's going to send you $50,000?
Yeah.
They're not. So your first deal is very important and needs to be done so you can move on. The third question I think you should ask is, do they have any skin in the game? That's a euphemism. Are they investing any of their own money? That's really what you're asking. And it's really twofold now, Julie, because if you're going to do a deal, you may put up some money, just like all the other investors, and you're probably going to sign a mortgage, a deed of trust. You're going to sign some financial document. So I know a long time ago, the question of skin in the game was only about how much money would you invest. If you're asking everyone to invest $50,000, and this is somewhat of a marketing statement, how much do you have to invest so they're satisfied? Do you have to invest 300,000? No. Do you have to invest 50? Well, maybe. Do you have to invest 25? Well, maybe, because you're also signing the mortgage. So we've got a combination of things that qualify for skin in the game. And if the answer to that question from the sponsor is no, I'm not going to invest everything in this deal, and for some reason I'm not going to sign the mortgage, then the sponsor isn't going along with you making money at the same time in the same way that you make money. And so I think we need to be a team in that. It needs to be perceived that we're a team. And the last question, and it is depending upon the age group of your investors, gets to be a very important question. Julie, if something comes up in my life and I need liquidity, where am I going to get that liquidity? And the only answer Julie can give is, well, the operating agreement that has the rules of how we run our group has been put together by a reputable attorney. And I can tell you, Gene, that in one of the articles in my operating agreement, it's Article 11, we talk about voluntary liquidity. I want to give my investment to my daughter. I want to sell my investment to someone. So there has to be rules about that. And generally, without getting too much in detail, the document is going to say if you're going to voluntarily pass on your units, your investment to someone else, we'd like you to keep it in the company. So the first thing we're going to say is, I'm going to come to Julie and I'm going to say, I need to sell. Julie's going to say, okay, I'm going to offer it to all the other members that are already here. In bits and pieces, they can buy it all. That's great, or one person can buy it. Julie's going to say, and then if that doesn't happen, if the company has money, the company can buy it and retire that interest. And if no one else buys it, the company doesn't buy it, maybe Julie can buy it. Maybe the people in the management LLC can buy it. So our purpose is to keep the interest in the company. There's kind of two parts of that. Number one is that interest has a check associated with it. Checks go out to the investors, and it has voting rights associated with it. So we look at those two things different. The manager of the company, the manager LLC, is not going to be able to stop me from transferring my economic interest, transferring who's going to get the check to whoever I want. Can't do that. However, the management can stop whoever gets that check from voting, because you don't know if that person who gets a check has any ability to vote. I've had very interesting situations where people have wanted to give their units to people as rewards for something, and we know that the people don't know anything about real estate, and so we give in our documents the management entity the ability to decide if the person who gets the interest can vote. So those are the things that are important. And we haven't talked about the real estate at all, which I said I wasn't going to. Continuity, have you done it before? Skin in the game, and how am I protected for my liquidity? Now, one of the reasons I'm here is because you guys have come up with a plan that's a little different than it has been in the last 10 years, 15 years, to provide possibilities of equity. And I'd love to have you talk about what all this is here.
Yeah,
Yep.
I would love to. Do you want to lead that
Let's do it.
conversation?
Yeah. So PREIshare is really leading by creating the first secondary marketplace ever for the passive investor. Nowhere has there ever just been a hub or a place where people can shop, buy, sell, and even try to price out what their fractional or passive investment is worth. And so it's been really fun talking to people and getting these listings in where people are saying, I didn't know I could do that. Or could I even sell just a portion of my fraction? And there's so many things available to do that just has never been basic practice. It's legal to do, and you'll tell us all about that. But we are creating the PREIshare listing hub and are chucking that full of listings right now and can't wait to open that up for people to literally passively buy and sell to each other as passive investors.
No, that sounds great. That's really that's what I thought it was. That's really good. Christian, you were going to add something.
Yeah, and I was going to add, because based off of what you said, in the past, it's always been the concern of the syndicator in offering liquidity is who is this person that's going to come in, and are they legally viable, and are they going to create more issues? Or the other situation would be, do I want to go create liquidity in a transaction that is operating when I might be onto my new raise and focused on getting my next set of investors, especially if all the operating capital in this transaction is needed for the transaction. This really came about from our CEO, Mike Anderson, who you're familiar with, when he sold his last firm and went from having a lot of GP interest ownership to LP interest ownership. He realized just the lack of control he had over his own portfolio if he wanted to, liquidate and use funds for another reason. And what we're doing is creating a way for that to happen and bridging the gap of problems for the passive investor and also for the syndicators themselves. So our goal is to have the listing hub where accredited investors can come in there and they can shop for passive interests inside real estate syndications, and people who want out can go ahead and sell.
Because every investment can take unlimited accredited. So if your platform is going to be all for accredited, that solves one of the issues we'll talk about later when we get into 506B and 506C. That's really great. Now, Julie, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, having this listing hub open solves so many challenges, but I think the biggest two are liquidity for somebody who does have a life and emergency or can't hold, that investment for 10 years. But also for somebody maybe more like me that says, I would love to invest, but I don't want to be locked in. That scares me to death. And so we're really hoping that the number of investments, of investors that a sponsor can pull from is going to be so much greater and make their raises so much easier just by saying, did you know if there's a problem, a challenge, or a hiccup, there's liquidity there. So
No, that's important. Someone like me, I'm a little bit older than you guys are, and if you came to me with an offering that had a 10-year horizon on it, I'm not certain that would be interesting to me unless I saw that there was a liquidity program. So we've talked about voluntary liquidity, which in my document is Article 11. Article 12 is involuntary. And that's something that I think your program would be very good. Let's say someone has to file bankruptcy, and now the court is in charge of all their assets. And one of the things that they have as assets is shares in an LLC. Well, the manager of the LLC, Julie, you want to get those shares out of the control of the judge. You want to know who's going to be your new investor. So if you had a backup like this, I would think that would work. I haven't really seen it in action and thought it through, but involuntary liquidity, dying, bankruptcy, divorce, lawsuits, all sorts of things happen where someone else all of a sudden is in charge of those units. And you want to get those units back into some control that you have. So I think that would be a pretty interesting idea. And I would think that as your business expands, I would think that I may have to add a paragraph in both Articles 11 and 12 that would authorize the company to accept a new investor from a platform like yours. And then I think we probably have to do away with the dichotomy between voting and cash. The person who comes in from your group to buy that probably wants to vote and wants the check. Would that be right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we have Brad on our team. He's 25 years, legal experience in real estate syndications, and he's written up that paragraph, so to speak, because we work with a lot of syndicators, and they want to utilize this to offer the liquidity so that they no longer have people coming to them, and that's exactly what it is.
So that's what I could do. My marching orders are to get with Brad and get that paragraph so I could start including it,
Exactly.
even though I don't do your offering documents. As this gains traction and other people know about it, which I know they do already because I get questions about it, I need to put that in our document. That's very good.
That would be so great because we really are just coming out with this huge movement to educate the fact that it is possible. It's just never really been approached on a wide scale.
Not in the limited partnership and LLC business. There was a time when it was approached somewhat in the tenant in common business, but that was much too complicated because of the deeds and mortgages and all that stuff. That was never going to work. So this sounds like this would work. Great. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and we're seeing others out there that are creating similar spin-offs, I would call it. Not that they're spinning off of us necessarily, but similar ideas. But a lot of them, they're still controlling that marketplace.
Well, yes, I know some sponsors who probably would offer that type of liquidity with their own money. That's why the last option in my voluntary liquidity is maybe the manager can buy it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in the company, but the manager, this manager LLC, when I was syndicating, my manager LLC was the manager of 16 different funds. So that would have been perfect. If I'd had the money, I could go provide liquidity for any one of my investors and bring it inside of my management LLC, which would be great. Huh, interesting.
And the benefit to investors is if you do or you are required to sell it back to somebody that's within the investment, your negotiation point kind of starts at what you bought in at. Many times they're not going to give you any of your realized gain. And so if there's now an open marketplace and you invested into a value add transaction that is now maybe doubled in value, but is just going to put off cash flow for the next 3 to 5 years, you could potentially realize some of that value by selling to an investor, because this new investor that's looking at buying it now gets to go off of the performance of the transaction rather than investing based off of pro forma like you may have when you first got into it.
Well, absolutely, because one of the things I'm finding in the marketplace is everyone who bought a property in 16, 17, and 18, every syndicator who bought a property has great equity. Properties are doing well, everything is fine, and so they want to typically do an exchange into another property. Well, at that time, not every investor, if I've been in it for 10 years, and now I'm thinking, oh my God, they're going to exchange another property. We've got another 10 years. This might be the time for me to get out. And I might be able, I'm just thinking I might be able to sell my interest to someone who wants to go into the new property. And that would be interesting because right now all I can do is I have to tell Julie, well, I want out. So Julie's going to have to put that money in a separate escrow, and I'm going to get what's there, and it's going to be distributed to me. But there might be other opportunities. I'd have to investigate that. Yeah, my mind is racing here when I think of the opportunities that your platform is going to provide.
Well, and that's the whole idea behind it. I think when we first roll it out, people usually think, I'm in a bad deal that I don't like, and I want to sell my interest in that bad deal. And the reality is there's so many other ways the listing hub is a benefit to folks, and they might be trapped in a good deal, unfortunately. And you're probably seeing this in the market right now, where with the interest rates changing, what was a 3 to 5 year plan just became a 7 to 10 year plan,
Absolutely.
simply because they can't trade out their interest rate. And if somebody invested because they wanted to put their kid in college, or because they were coming up on retirement, or whatever it is, they may not want to ride it for the long run, but there is value, extra value from what they invested in that investment.
Absolutely. So it sounds great. It's something that I certainly will talk to my certain clients about investigating with you as they look for ways to provide liquidity for their investors.
Yeah, we believe big picture, this will actually lower the returns that you have to offer to your passive investors, because when you now can offer them the liquidity that they didn't have before, they may not require such a big upside.
Absolutely. I have read a book by an MAI, and I can't remember, a member of the Appraisal Institute, which talks about valuing fractional interests. And he talks about how interests in an LLC have less value on resale than an interest on a tenant in common property, because a tenant in common property, you get a deed and it's much more liquid than the interest in an LLC. So this may go toward solving that problem. Well, we could talk about that for hours and hours and hours. I know you guys have in coming up with your plans. So that's great. Where do people find out about this? Right here? Or?
Well, yeah, they can go to PREIshare. Actually, it's going to be thelistinghub.com, or they can just go to PREIshare.com. There's plenty of ways to find us. If you just even Google PREIshare, you'll be able to find plenty of information online about this that we're putting out. And I think the last question that I'd love to get from you as an attorney is, one of the biggest things that we're finding right now is we have to actually educate the public that this is valid and legal, because there's been a lot of education from syndicators for many years that if you invest into a syndication, it's an illiquid investment and you're going to have to be involved for as long as the deal is going.
Well, it's illiquid until you read Article 11 or 12. And what I didn't say about Article 11, which is voluntary liquidity, is we set up a requirement that the person who wants to sell comes to Julie with a notice that they want to sell and they want X number of dollars. And then Julie goes through the process. Okay, members, Gene wants to sell for X number of dollars. How does that work? Can the company buy it? Do we want to buy it? And maybe they go back to Gene and say, no, we don't have any buyers at X number of dollars. Okay, so then our voluntary liquidity says Gene can go back to the marketplace and find a different price that someone will pay for it. But then we say he has to bring it back to us, and we'll go through the same 3 steps, right? Because we want to keep that interest in the company. So we'll go back on those same 3 steps with a lower price. Well, you're opening up the fact that that somewhere along the line, before the investor comes to us, they get a valuation.
Correct.
And they could get that valuation somehow through your organization, and then they could come in and say, okay, Julie, I want X plus. And if in fact no one in the company wants to do it according to my documents, they can sell it for X plus.
And potentially, if you end up making the changes or suggesting the changes to the people that are going with you, is the benefit to them that now is they have somebody that doesn't want to be in their deal that they get to keep happy. They may come back to them in the future.
Sure.
And now they have a new investor that does want to be in their deal, that's likely to invest not only now, but likely over and over again.
Sure, possible. my mind is racing with great opportunities for this.
I know we've tried to poke holes in from all different angles. And even when we first talk about it and think, well, there could be a problem, it ends up being a positive in the end. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
you can't see that having that open vision and what's the word I'm looking for? We have liquidity and we have transparency. When you have that transparency, it makes it's a win-win.
And as far as the securities laws go, if I'm the one who wants to sell my security, I can always sell my own security. It's not the manager. It's not another offering. It's nothing. It's just mine. It's for sale by owner.
Yeah.
I can sell my own security to everyone, like I can sell my 100 shares of Coca-Cola stock to anyone, as long as I own it, as long as we don't get anyone else in the middle, I think. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
And that was what I was wanting you to share.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. So I would love
We
now.
haven't talked about that, but that because I'm thinking, well, they're taking these units and they're packaging them and they're selling them. Isn't that an offering? And I'm thinking, no, people are selling their own units, but they're just using your platform and your procedure.
That's exactly
I imagine.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Excellent.
So let's jump into your expertise, Gene. Let's talk about what is a syndication and when should somebody syndicate? I mean, from my perspective, it's great timing to have you on the show because I'm going to share this with a lot of my colleagues. We've had the conversation come up. I'm a licensed real estate agent as well. So inside the brokerage, there's this conversation of scare and fear. They heard that somebody that they knew was putting out posts on the internet, social media, raising money, and all of a sudden all of their assets are frozen and they're getting investigated by the SEC. And what is it? When is it that you come to this point where you have to step back and say, wait, I've created a security?
Wow, yeah. I get a lot of homework calls. I call them homework calls. Good people calling saying, I'm thinking about doing this. First of all, I get a lot of calls from people who say, I've been a passive investor in 20 deals, and now I want to be the lead investor, the syndicator. And I just stop and let that go quiet for a little bit. And then I come back and say, why? Why? Because if investing in 20 deals as a passive has been good for you, why don't you make it 40 and go on with your life?
Yeah.
Because this isn't a carefree life. It's not a nothing down, no risk life, being a syndicator. And we certainly know in the end, what I learned from being a syndicator for my 20 years is the care and maintenance of investors can become overwhelming, depending on how many you have and all that. And the risk is always greater than you think. And just in the last 3 or 4 years, my clients probably never thought about the risk of a pandemic coming through when they're buying multifamily and they can't visit all the units in the building they want to buy. And some government agency is going to come along and say, well, these people don't have to pay rent for a while. Who figured that? And who figured that interest rates were going to go from 3 to 7 in about 6 months in the last 2 years? So there's always something that comes up that you can't foresee. And I'll just tell just an aside. My daughter and I went to China in 2019. We took a 2-week tour of China, and when we came back, we were both deathly ill. I was sick for 6 months. And I was in the emergency room 3 times, and they said I had influenza B. And they gave me a Z-Pack and told me to take NyQuil and told me to go home. I was extremely contagious, and I'm sure Kay, my wife, was thrilled to see me come home. They didn't know what it was. So I am thinking I am individually totally responsible for bringing COVID to California, because that's clearly what I had. And who knew about that when I got on the plane to go there? There's always more risk in anything than you plan, right? Yeah. So in my homework calls, the question I get the most is, I want to put 10 people together to buy a piece of property. And the reason for that is they don't have enough money to buy the property themselves. I interviewed on my YouTube channel, I've interviewed 37 of my clients, and I've always asked them how to get started. And it's all the same answer. I was investing on my own, and then I found a property that was too big, so I needed someone else's money. So I went out and had to learn how to do that. So that's because the best advice is don't ever syndicate if you don't have to. If you have enough money to buy all the real estate you want by yourself, do it.
Yeah.
That's the best. That's the best advice. But anyhow, they say I want to bring in 10 people, but I don't want it to be a syndication. And I said, well, we've got a vocabulary issue here. It is a syndication. We're in syndications all the time. Anytime there's two or more entities or people getting together to do a business transaction, it is a syndication. I flew here this morning. That's a syndication. I don't own an airplane. I'm not a pilot, so 147 of my best friends and I got on a plane and we flew here. That's a syndication.
Mhm.
Health insurance, life insurance, it's all syndication, pooling money to accomplish something. But when it stops just being a syndication is because you're pooling money and there's been a promise of a profit. Or I probably should not use promise, at least an expectation of a profit. And then, so then I say to the people, well, are you going to run this? Yes. Are you going to get paid? Yes. Are you going to make the decisions for everyone? Yes. I said, well, your better question would be, I want to bring 10 people together. And how do I do it without it being a security? Or if it is a security, how do I do it and do it right? Because the securities laws are criminal statutes. Not everything ends up in a criminal way, but a lot of people do. And you can think about the news and the people you've heard about that go to jail when they do things wrong with securities laws. And the real issue really boils down to number one, are you going to get paid? And number two, are you going to make the decision? Because without being real legal about it, the definition of a security is an investment in money in a common enterprise, LLC, limited partnership, joint venture, whatever it is, with an expectation of profit through the results of someone else. And that's what you have to hone in on. I want a vacation. So I'm going to go on GoFundMe and I'm going to ask you all to send me money. That's an investment of money in the common enterprise, my GoFundMe bank account. And I'm going to run it myself. There's no promise of profit there.
Right.
So that is just a donative, if you would, syndication. Well, in the securities world, it's the promise of the profit done by someone else. And you use the words already here, passive. Passive investors let someone else manage their money. So the government had, when they started all this regulation back in 1933, the government had a reason to pass rules and laws to protect the passives. Basically, that's what it's all about. It's all about two things. Number one, full disclosure. What did you say earlier?
Transparency.
Transparency and something else, but full disclosure. As a syndicator, I'm required to tell the investors every material fact I know before they invest so they can make an informed decision for themselves. That's one of the two securities laws. And the other securities law is who's doing the selling? Are we regulating who securities agents are? Are we background checking? Are we doing things? So, really, to protect the investors from investing in a fraudulent deal and dealing with people who sell fraudulent deals. That's where it is. And so when the people want to run the project and they want to make it happen, we are into the world of securities. And we step away from the world of real estate. Because the world of securities just doesn't deal with real estate, it deals with everything where people raise money. Not counting Wall Street. And all that stuff on Wall Street is a security. You buy a stock, you buy a bond. That's all a security. It's all regulated by the SEC. Staying away from Wall Street and taking advantage of what's called the private placement exemption, Regulation D, the private placement exemption, is stepping into a huge business. In the last 12 months that the SEC reported, it was $2.7 trillion of money that was raised in the private placement marketplace. And less than a third is real estate. I mean, every business goes out there. You start a business, you take all the money out of your savings account. You go to mom and dad and get money from their savings account, and you go to the bank and you're still short. So you go out and raise money from people who want to invest in your business. And right now we're doing, as opposed to just real estate, we're doing a fiber optics company. We're doing someone wants to open a chain of salons. We're doing this as kind of real estate, but it's an almond grove. So we're in the production of a product. So there are a lot of things that we do that aren't just real estate, but it's still the same thing. If you invest your money into my enterprise, there's probably an expectation of profit, and I'm going to make it run. So I'm the syndicator, and I'm selling a security. So that's the first question. It's a long conversation on my homework calls. And then the next question they ask me is, well, can I tell everyone about this on social media? And now we need to go one step farther into the depths. When I was syndicating, and I started before 1981, we were told that the rule was we could raise money from rich and smart people, rich and smart. So who's everyone else? I don't know. Not rich and not smart, but rich and smart. We could raise money from rich and smart people. And that was about it. Very loose rules. So 1981 came along and the Regulation D was adopted. And Regulation D helped money raisers. There has been a number of securities law changes since 1981. And in my opinion, every one of them is designed to promote capital formation. Because when you think about $2.7 trillion being raised, how many jobs does that create? And that's what Congress says. We're talking about small businesses, 500 employees or less, and, $2 trillion is going into those small businesses. And so we need to promote capital formation. That's what the Jobs Act was all about, of course. But anyhow, Reg D came along and said, here's the deal. We're going to define who's rich and smart, and then we're going to tell you the rules. And so they came out with one rule, and all it was called Regulation D, Rule 506. There obviously, there's 501, 2, 3, 4, 5, but 506 says you can raise as much money as you want without going to the SEC as long as you follow these rules. And so what they said is everything that doesn't follow these rules has to go to the SEC, but if you follow these rules, you're exempt. And that's where $2.7 trillion comes from, where it's an exempt security. And Regulation D said you can raise as much money as you want from as many accredited investors as you want. So they put a definition along with rich and smart, and you cannot advertise. We want everyone who's going to invest with you to know you, and you need to know them. And they came out with a word called sophisticated. And they said on top of all the accredited investors in the world who can invest with you, you can take 35 people who aren't accredited but know what they're doing. And we don't want to go into the definition of sophisticated, but okay. So it's sophisticated. They can read the documents and they know what to expect, and they can understand the risk. Well, that was new because we couldn't take sophisticated investors before. And we didn't know really too much about how much we could raise. It was all nebulous. So that was a big deal, Regulation D. And I was in the business at that time. The problem was you can't advertise. So here I am knowing that I can take as many investors as I want, but I don't know how to find them. Personal relationships, that'll get you so far, right?
Yeah.
And then all the accredited investors that are out there in the world who would have loved to invest in my self-storage projects didn't know who I was.
Mhm.
So that went on for a long time. And in 2012, the Jobs Act came along and said, okay, we've been doing this for 30 years. There's a lot of smart people out there who should be able to read the documents and make a decision if they want to invest on their own. Why don't we let them? Why don't we let Gene go out and somehow advertise to all the rich and smart people, all the accredited investors, and let all the accredited investors out there find Gene and invest in his project? And we'll do that to promote capital formation. So they took this Rule 506 and they divided it in two parts. They left the original part and they put a letter B behind it, 506B. Raise as much money as you want, unlimited accredited, 35 sophisticated, no advertising. Over here, 506C, raise as much money as you want, all the accredited investors you can find, and you can advertise. But because you don't know these people, you have to take some steps to, and the language is to be reasonably assured that they are accredited investors. So you have to do a background check, you have to do a third-party background check. And that's fine. Now that sounds good, doesn't it? So now Julie is going to advertise. She's going to put her offering on her website. And I'm an accredited investor, and I'm sitting at home smoking a cigar and having a glass of brandy, and I see her offering. I'm not going to send her a $50,000 check because I don't know who she is. So I'm going to go back to the questions. Julie, what's your continuity plan? Have you done this before? What's your track record? Are you going to have skin in the game? And what's your liquidity provision? And if all those things make sense, why don't you send me the documents about your offering and I'll research it and then maybe I will invest with you. So it's not a slam dunk. It's not. In fact, of the $2.7 trillion, over 90% is still raised under the old rule. You got to know who your investors are and they have to know who you are. About 10%, and it's growing every year. People are getting some investors through advertising. So back to my homework call. I want to put 10 people together to buy a piece of real estate, and I don't want it to be a syndication. Well, it is. So now how are you going to graduate into a security? Because you're going to be the boss, you're going to make money, people are going to count on you. Now, how do you find investors? Well, you either find people that you know and know you, or at some point in time, you can move on and advertise. And that's a 45-minute to an hour homework call that I have. And then the question is, will the people call me back and say, that sounds like fun. I think I want to do that. Or do they take my advice and just continue to invest as a passive investor?
One of the things, there's so much to unpack
I know.
out of that, Gene. But one
I
of the
didn't want to go
things
too far in depth, but I think it was good.
I love it. Yeah, that was great. And one of the things that stuck out to me is what you said up front is if you're doing well investing with other people passively, why in the world would you want to become a syndicator? Because this is the big misnomer out there. People hear about passive investing and they think if I buy an apartment complex, that's passive investing because I'm collecting those checks and I'm not going out there and working. But the reality is there's a lot of work behind it, right?
Yeah.
And there's a tremendous amount of risk and stress, or
Mhm.
if you don't call it stress, it's at least responsibility that goes along with that. The only true passive investing that I've seen is being a passive investor in somebody else's deal.
Yeah, in an LLC or a limited partnership and whatever. And back to your question of your real estate agents going out and doing stuff that's going to get them in trouble or seeing other people that's getting them in trouble. They think they're selling real estate. And I understand this. I've been there. I spent a lot of time educating real estate people that when you step into the securities world, it's a whole new business, which is something that I like as a title, which is the title of my book. It's a whole new business. And that's when I wrote my book, I wrote my book to educate real estate people. Be careful, because when you go out there, you're no longer selling real estate, you're selling a security. We're not worried. Real estate license law and all that stuff, different set of laws. You better do it right. And quite honestly, the rule about doing a 506B with your friends and family is don't put it on social media, period. And these people that you're talking about are putting it on social media. And in the old days, the SEC examiners and people who research syndicators, they could get on a plane and they could fly around and look at what you're doing. Now all they have to do is go on their computer and research the word guaranteed return. Research
So
period.
true.
Yeah. Some of those words, and they just sit there and they find people who have put that in their offering, and then they go after them. And it's a very active business. We don't hear about too many of them because many of them are small-time operators, and they do exactly what you said, Christian. They find the person, and they bring an action that says you sold a security without registering it. Well, that means that you didn't do it right. It wasn't exempt. If you do it right, you win that one.
Yeah.
You sold a security and you didn't have a securities license. Well, if you do it right, you don't need a securities license because you're selling your own offering. You guys bring out your offering with looking for 100 investors. You're selling your own stuff for sale by owner. It's issue or exemption. And did you tell all the people everything they needed to know to make an informed decision? That's where they're going to get you, because you didn't follow the rules and you didn't give them all the pertinent information. And if they find that you've done that, the simplest thing to do is issue a cease and desist order. And then they come in and grab all your assets, because they may want to take all the money you raised and give it back to the investors. And if the money you raised is already in concrete trucks pouring slabs on self-storage, they don't care. They want your bank account to pay all the investors back. And that's where people end up in trouble, because they can't do it. And there's something that I came up in the last year. I let a client go because a client reached into Fund B to do something that he needed to do in Fund A. And he didn't have the authority to do that. And when I learned about that, I had two choices. I had one choice when I write offerings for him in the future and I write about the risk. I'd have to write that there's a risk that this client is going to take money from here and put it here. He'll never raise any money and I had to have to write that. Or eliminate him as a client. And so I eliminated him as a client. He's probably off somewhere else using another attorney who doesn't know what happened. But his defense with me was, well, I paid the money back. I knew that was his defense. And there's a great court case that says in the securities world, there's no such thing as no harm, no foul. You take it. The case actually said that the person put it back plus more than he had promised these people in their own deal. And he's now doing 7 years in jail. And he had to pay out of his own money the $6 million back, even though the people were made whole. So you have to be very careful. So it is a criminal statute, and it can be trouble. Most of the time it doesn't get that far. What are we following now? The guy with the cryptocurrency
Oh, yeah.
His court case started this week as we film this, and that's exciting. And as my wife says, why would anyone have invested with a man whose last name was Madoff?
Right.
And we've all heard of Mr. Madoff,
Mhm.
Yep.
right?
So I'm going to backtrack a little bit because I believe that I understand it based on what you've said. And I'm going to clarify some of the questions that have come to me because, as far as I understand, one of the guys said, I'm helping somebody sell a piece of commercial real estate, but he would really love to develop it. He doesn't have the funds to do that, so he would be willing to sell half the ownership to somebody who understands development that could help him do so. That in and of itself, not a security because both people are going to be in the process of doing the deal together, but it is a syndication because it's more
That's
than one
right. The
person.
fourth prong isn't there solely through the efforts of another.
Yep.
So that's okay.
And so if somebody's out there talking on social media about a transaction that they have, they found a deal, they would like to bring others and get them involved because maybe they don't have all the resources or
Mhm.
expertise. If they joint venture on the deal, which many of us in real estate, that's how we start. We start with, we go and do a transaction either with somebody else or with ourselves, and that's the deal. And then we decide we want to do something and we need other resources. So they're fine if everybody has voting rights and everybody is participating in the transaction in their own way. At the point when somebody says, I will commit my money to this deal, but I don't want to have anything else to do with the transaction, it
Mhm.
becomes a security. It's a
Sure
whole
it
new
does.
business.
Sure. Let's say your joint venture that you're setting up, you put in 80% of the money and I put in 20. And our voting rights go along with our economic interest. That's a security. You can get 80% of the benefits and I can get 20% of the benefits based on our money that's invested. But we have to have two equal votes on major decisions, or you really are in charge of my money, aren't you?
So that's a great clarification.
Yep.
On any transaction, no matter how many people are involved,
Mhm.
everybody has to be equal in the voting rights.
If you're trying to keep it away from the security. And then, you get 10 people, it doesn't work because you never get the votes and you never get decisions made. So, but we run into that often where, well, I'm going to take someone in. I'm going to take someone in with you bring up 90% of the money and I'll put in 5, but I'm going to make the decisions. It's just two of us. It's just a joint venture. No, not unless we both have equal votes. And the person who brings in the 95% of the money isn't going to want to have an equal vote.
Nope.
Yeah.
They're not, so you have to be
Interesting.
careful about that.
And it,
So that's something, and I think that the agent has to be careful about selling a security. The agent certainly needs to know what a security is and not find themselves in selling the security of others, because the for sale by owner rule says you can't sell someone else's house unless you have a real estate license, right?
Yep.
The issuer rule in securities says you can't sell someone else's security unless you have a securities license. You can sell your own, but not someone else's. Yeah, and getting paid. This is the biggest thing that I see today, is people running around and saying, "Well, I don't put together a deal, Christian, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to have you help me raise money because I know you've got a lot of people, and if you bring in $500,000, I'll pay you $50,000 for a finder's fee." That's illegal. The rule is there can be no transaction-based compensation, specifically the word no transaction-based compensation, which sounds like a commission paid to someone who doesn't have a securities license.
Mm.
I could bring you in my manager deal, or maybe that's the agreement you have with Julie and your manager LLC, that you're going to raise all the money and you're going to split the ownership of the manager LLC 50-50, regardless how much you actually raise.
Yeah, because once you put it on the amount that you raise,
Yeah,
it's
then it's a
transaction-based.
commission, right?
Yeah. So the beautiful part about this is it's not all that scary, right, Gene? As long as you are willing to do the homework and hire somebody who understands the laws, it's okay that this is a brand new business. You just want to make sure you're doing it right from the get-go.
Well, that's true. And one of the things that's made my career, whatever it is my ability to mentor. And if someone calls me and hires me to do an offering, they'll get me. Yes, I have staff and all that, but they'll get me. When I go to trade shows, the objections I hear from other people who are using other attorneys often is the other attorneys are not responsive. You can't get a hold of them. As soon as they get the fee, they pass you on to a paralegal or something. And our firm is small enough where we don't do that. And I think that's what I wanted when I was a syndicator. So I learned what I should be when I grew up to be an attorney by working with several attorneys when I was a syndicator over 20 years. I knew exactly that I would be a flat fee attorney. I knew I would carry E&O insurance, and I knew I would be responsive.
Yeah.
Those are all the
If
things
somebody
I
wants to
wanted.
work with you, how do they find you?
Well, typically they find me by Google.
Okay.
If the Trowbridge is a very Googleable name, and syndication lawyers isn't quite so easy because there are a lot of syndication lawyers, but the website is there. And I think you're going to post that at the end of this.
Yeah, we
Give
can put the
everyone my-
website right on the screen here.
Good. And my website has a lot of good information. My YouTube channel is exceptional on information, and at the website you can get a free PDF of the book. It's a whole new business.
Yep.
You can actually, just for shipping, get a hard copy sent to you, and you two guys know on Kindle there's a narrated copy of the book where yours truly sat down and narrated the book, which I've had some good responses to. So it's a great business collectively. And my parting comments are, when I was a real estate broker, the thing that I missed was after the closing, I got my check and I turned the keys over, and then I was kind of divorced from the person. I was divorced from how was it going to turn out? What was it going to be? Maybe every 6 months I had to go back and touch base with them, but that wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for a more of a long-term relationship with people. And so the syndication, how did I get into syndication? After buying 3 or 4 properties myself, I found a property that I didn't have enough money to buy myself. So I reached out to 4 guys I went to college with, and we bought it together. And I learned. I learned what a syndication was. I learned how to do that. And I stayed in that for 20 years and learned that it's a great business from that regard. And it's also a very good business from being an attorney and mentoring people and watching people be very, very successful in this business. And they're successful, their investors are successful. And that's a good feeling.
Well, I highly suggest if you're watching this, reach out to Gene, especially if you even think you're getting close to the line of creating something that would be a security. Make sure that you're set up so that it can be an unregistered security and you can raise the money properly and use the proper forms.
And there are all sorts of old wives' tales out there about, well, if you just use friends and family, or if it's less than 10 people, and none of that is true. So you should talk to me or some attorney and give you the good advice. And our homework calls are free.
That's nice because
And-
it's always changing.
Yeah, no, our homework calls are free.
In fact, that's why we're on version 4 of your book. And I
Yep.
love that you always update based on when the SEC changes the rules.
Yeah, this book, version 4, came out because of the major change, and we should have talked about that before, in the accredited investor definition, which once again was to promote capital formation. The accredited investor definition had been the same since 1981. And here they came along, and one of the things that they said is when you're calculating net worth or income, it's based on a household. Spousal equivalents, not just married people or single people. And there are all sorts of people in this world who live together in a household who can now combine their income and combine their net worth to qualify as accredited. That's great. They let securities brokers be accredited because they're in the business. They should be. And they made some provisions for entities Before, you never really knew if an entity was accredited or not until you looked at who was in the entity. And now they just said if the entity has $5 million in assets, it is accredited, no matter who's in there. So let's say my law firm had, and I wish it did, $5 million in its 401k plan. There are probably only 2 of us in the law firm who are accredited. Wouldn't make any difference. The 401k plan could invest in an offering as an accredited investor. And that opens a lot. So they're doing that. I would say that the one thing we're worried about now is the dollar and cent amount that they use for accredited investors has been the same since 1981. And the state regulators would like it increased, if nothing else, reflecting inflation. So, for example, $1 million net worth, you're accredited. That was a lot of money in 1981. $3.5 million today would be about the same number. $300,000 married filing jointly, 1981. $750 would be about the number today. So the states are going to propose that there's a change in the dollar and cents. And I don't think that's going to happen. For one, most of that $2.7 trillion is raised by stockbrokers, and they're going to fight a change in the definition of accredited investors like crazy. And I don't know how that promotes capital formation. I think it might promote investor protection, but there might be some other ways to do that. So that's what I have my ear on, is what's going to come out of the state regulators, because they're the first ones to find out if something goes bad. You call California or the Utah Department of Securities and say, I bought into Julie's deal and it's gone bad. Okay, that's where it starts, and they're concerned about investors investing in bad deals. They want to protect their citizens.
Well, this is an extra credit conversation then. I would love for you to talk about if you're doing a Reg D unregistered security and you want to have registered investment advisors raise money for you, what are the rules there?
You can do that. A registered actually, one of the definitions of the early definition of accredited was rich and smart. And smart meant if you used a registered investment advisor on your deals and they looked at the deal and they signed off, you're smart. Because there are a lot of retired people who've inherited money, and they have professionals advise them what to do. They don't make their own decisions. So the registered investment advisor would work. Now, a registered investment advisor, they come in 2 coats. One coat is they're a stockbroker, well, which is fine because they're selling someone else's security, but they're registered to do that. And the other one is they're not a stockbroker, they're an asset management. So typically they get 1 or 2% of dollars that are under their control. And today the dollars are in the bank, and tomorrow the dollars are in your deal. They didn't make any money doing that. They still get the same asset management fee. So you have to know what the what the registered investment advisor is doing. It's good.
So if they are a stockbroker, you can pay them based on performance. If they're not, then you cannot.
That's right. You have to know that. And what's interesting about that, as a broker, I bring in a listing. I'm sure it's the same in your state. I give you the listing, you have to approve the listing, and then everyone in your office can sell a listing I brought in. But as a stock brokerage firm, if you're the broker, you have to find what your people can sell. You have to do the due diligence, and then you have to turn it loose on your salespeople, and they can only sell what you approve, but it has to start from you. When I was raising money, Christian, I raised almost all of my money through the broker-dealer community, and that was totally viable back then. I'd go and they'd do due diligence on me and on my project, and I'd sign a selling agreement, then they'd raise all the money. That was before the era of, this is interesting where this is going to come back, that was before the era of REITs. Because what I was selling wasn't liquid. And when the REITs came out, a lot of REITs are listed. And so you could put an investor who didn't want to be in a non-liquid investment into a REITs, and all of a sudden the broker-dealer community wasn't selling the products that Gene Trowbridge put out because they could sell storage facilities from people who've done REITs, okay? So what was the problem back then? Lack of liquidity. And what are you guys working on? Bringing in liquidity. So if you had been around in 1994, 95, and I went to them and I said, well, we can sell this, and your question of liquidity has been resolved by this company I know in Utah, I might have stayed in business a little longer. Interesting. So liquidity is a big issue, and congratulations for addressing it.
Thanks. Now that you've been able to stew on it for a little while, is there any other things that you want to share of how you believe this is going to change the market by offering this liquidity?
A final Trowbridge tip. No pressure.
Trowbridge important points.
Is that what it's called?
Trowbridge
okay,
important
Trowbridge important points.
Tips. Well, I think you've identified it. I think that is a roadblock to marketing. I don't think it's an issue in the securities law. It's just simply a roadblock to marketing. I'm not going to invest in a 10-year fund, period. A lot of good 10-year funds out there. But if I knew there was an active liquidity game, I might. All right. A lot of people are afraid of tying up their money because, you know, what's the marketplace going to look like in 3 years? What's interest rates? A lot of changes are going on, and a lot of people are hesitant.
Yeah.
That's why the stock market is attractive, because it's every minute you can have liquidity. And so I think you're bringing liquidity into that. I think it's a good idea. I just think that you're getting started, and you're going to learn more as you go on, and hopefully it works out for you and works out for the investors. Because if it works out for the investors, you've got a winner.
That's correct.
For sure.
Okay.
Yep. Well, thank you so much. It's a whole new business is always applicable. No matter what happens, it's always a whole new business.
No matter what you're raising money for.
Yep.
Last time I was at a conference, and I've learned when I'm at a conference and there are a lot of exhibitors, I go to every exhibitor and try to find out, is there someone who needs to raise money for their own product? And last time I was there was a guy who had a little invention, and it's like infrared rays or whatever it is, but it's designed for doctors and nurses in the healthcare industry, so you don't have to wash your hands. And it's supposedly more effective than, 3 minutes washing your hands and your fingers and everything. And I said, well, that's good. I said, how are you coming? Well, I got a patent. I said, well, that's good. How many of those things do you need to produce? Oh, a lot. I said, where are you going to get the money? He said, I have no idea. He said, my dad, who was standing alongside him after with this, giving us all the money he can. I said, well, we need to talk about how you can raise money to do that product, because that sounds like a winner to me.
I love it.
Love it.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another edition of the Fundication Show. We appreciate you being here, Gene. And if you guys would like to reach out to him, simply go to his website and inquire about how he can help you in your capital raising.
And if you'd like to see Gene's first episode, you can actually go to YouTube, do a search for PREIshare. There's all kinds of content, clips, videos, all the past Fundication shows, and Gene's first interview as well.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Gene.